I'd just like to, before I begin the presentation, to thank the organizing committee for allowing me to present in this particular session, because I'm a climatologist by training and I'm masquerading here as an economist, which I'm not in the least. In this talk, I'll at least try to bring out some of the economic implications of climate change as it pertains to the wine industry in Ontario. I'd like to also mention that the co-presenter in this talk, Don, I'm doing the presentation, and all errors and omissions I'll attribute to him. The wine industry in Ontario, this is a map of the Great Lakes area, and we're talking here about the Niagara region, which is the largest viticulture area in Canada. We have the Okanagan region, the second largest, and a relatively small area south of the city of Montreal in the province of Quebec. The Canadian viticulture is referred to as cool climate viticulture. And in the context of climate change, we have mixed benefits in the case of Canada. We're seeing, for example, a warming in the climate, but at the same time, over the last 40 years, the data have shown very clearly that there appears to be more volatility in the weather. In other words, a great deal of variation from one year to the next. And that's what I'd like to address in the presentation. Where'd you get this thing? Oh, okay. I'll skip this here, some of the... Yeah. What happened here? Okay. Now, this always happens. It doesn't, you're only seeing part of the diagram here. I don't know how I can make this smaller. This is the long-term climatic data for the Niagara region from 1970 to 2014. And I just want to explain to you, because I know as economists, in terms of climate, one of the ways in which we assess the evolution of the climate in an area is by looking, of course, at the temperature. But also, from the temperature, we can extract something called the growing degree days, the heat units. And heat units, of course, are one way in which we can assess the potential of an area in terms of the suitability of the different varieties, for example, Malbec. Malbec is a variety that prefers a relatively warm climate and would require at least about 14 to 1,500 growing degree days. So what we're showing here is an evolution of the climate of the Niagara region. But what I want to point out to you at the same time is that we started off as a why I'm not getting this to move. Can you go back there? Yeah. Okay, we'll keep this here, that's right. What we're trying to show here is that this, from 1970 to roughly 2014, we're seeing here a change every year from one year to the next. The climate, in fact, is warming. As you can see, the trend is an upward increasing trend. But one of the problems is that the changes from one year to the next. And certainly from the 1980s onwards, we're seeing a very, very high degree of variability. And this is one of the problems with viticulture. In other words, no two vintages are the same. Some years you have the heat units way down to 1,100 growing degree days, which means that some varieties will do well, such as the whites, such as Riesling, Chardonnay, and so on and so forth, Sauvignon Blanc. But the red varieties, such as Cab Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, these are varieties that will have a difficult time reaching maturity. So while on one hand then, the climate is changing, it's getting warmer, at the same time, it is subjected to a high degree of variability. And this is a major concern for wineries because wineries are faced with the problem of quality. So the quality is very much tied to the climate. And this is a situation which the cool climate regions are faced with. Cool climate regions are the areas where the heat units are under 1400 degrees, but those are the areas that are likely to benefit from climate change because potentially, as the climate warms up, some of the Bordeaux varieties, such as Cabernet Sauvignon, Cab Franc, and Merlot, that were previously considered marginal in terms of quality, those varieties are able to reach, to some extent, their full level of potential. So for the Niagara region, this holds, we have a mixed benefit. While on one hand, we're seeing a warming change in the climate, on the other hand, we are seeing a great deal of variability from one year to the next. And this is another example of the same information in which we're showing here the minimum amount of heat available in this region here, and this, of course, is the maximum. Now, again, you can see that it's 1 year from 1 year to the next. We are becoming a warmer region. The warmer region, of course, as I said, allows other varieties to be grown, but at the same time, it rules out other varieties that have been once considered very successful. And these, of course, are examples of vintage years. Vintage years, of course, are years in which you have the correct combination of temperature and precipitation. Typically, a vintage year would be a very warm year in which there's very little precipitation during the period from September to October, the so-called ripening and harvest period. So we're seeing more vintage years in the Niagara region. In other words, years in which you have excellent conditions for the production of red wines. Now, you probably, I don't know if anyone here is from England, but England, of course, at one point was seen as very marginal from the standpoint of grape production. And the southern part of England now is warming up. England, of course, now is quite famous, the southern part, for sparkling wine. And that is making a big difference. There are over 150 wineries in England. Who would have thought that England would be producing wine? And this is an example of the benefits of climate change. In some areas that are considered very, very marginal, now are actually becoming the premium wine region because the cool regions actually are the ones with wines that are very good in terms of well-balanced in terms of acidity and sugar, as opposed to the very, very warm climate that's occurring in parts of California, in parts of southern Australia, in parts of Spain, Greece, Italy, France, where the climate is warming at a very alarming rate and the wine's becoming very, very alcoholic. This is, again, I want to point out the problem in terms of variability. Even though the climate is changing and it may be beneficial, there is a high degree of unreliability in terms of vintages. And I'd just like to push on here. These are other areas of the Niagara region. This is a typical cool climate region in which you have heat units roughly under 1,200 growing degree days. And this is what the Champagne region is. The Champagne region has a climate which is fairly cool and allows, of course, the grapes such as Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier, and Pinot Noir to have a very high degree of acidity that allows sparkling wines to be made on a fairly consistent basis. I might add even the Champagne region is under threat from climate change in terms of warming. So in the Niagara region, let me just move on very quickly here. In the Niagara region, it is considered to be a cool climate region, but within the Great Lakes, we have also other areas that are once considered fairly marginal that are actually now emerging as areas quite suitable for production of grapes. Now, Canada is very fortunate in that it's a very big country with a very large range of climates, from the west coast, from Vancouver, all the way to Nova Scotia on the east coast. And in between, of course, we have the prairie regions, which are very unsuitable. But within the Ontario region, we have several areas that are actually now emerging as very, very good wine regions. So Canada, even though it's relatively small in terms of the production of wine, is actually in the making to be a very, very significant wine producer, mainly because of the varieties of climate that we see within the Great Lakes area. Now, we've done some prediction. We also done some modeling study, what we call general circulation models. And of course, the IPCC, all the prognostication we have in terms of what the climate is going to be like, various scenarios, whether it be moderate greenhouse effect or we have increase in greenhouse gases with situation as normal, or we have a case where we have drastic reduction in greenhouse as a result of more energy-saving technology and so on and so forth. The projection is we use 3 scenarios, and the projection, of course, all 3 projections indicate that the climate will be warming, and these are what we call general circulation models. We can model the climate based on different scenarios. We've only used 3 scenarios here, and so as you can see, by 2050, you can see a significant increase. What happened there? A significant increase in the heat units. So the Niagara region then is evolving, and this is what we are seeing. It's evolving from a cool area, which is at one time considered to be on the margins of grape production, and then no one would think that any wine came from Canada except for ice wine. But I don't know how familiar we are with the Niagara region. It's a very picturesque area. It is an area where the 2 lakes, Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, are very important in terms of the moderation of the climate. And I'll show you a little bit later on, very quickly. 5 more minutes. Okay. Okay. Let me switch then from the growing season to the winter. One of the biggest, the chief limitation to successful viticulture in Canada is the occurrence of extreme minimum temperatures, in other words, freezing temperatures. Where we have successful viticulture and where we have fruit production, the winter climates tend to be relatively moderate. With climate change, we're seeing, as we've seen in the first example, we've seen a warming of the summer climate or the growing season climate, but at the same time, our winters are getting warmer. Minus 20 degrees is a fairly common occurrence in the Niagara region, and at minus 20 degrees, you have a major damage, freeze damage to the cane and to what we call the fruiting bud of the vine. If the fruiting bud is damaged, of course, you have very little crop. And so in the Niagara region then, and then within the Ontario region, we've done analysis to determine areas where the occurrence of damaging temperatures is relatively low. The Niagara region, of course, is the preferred area because instead of the moderation of the 2 lakes, Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario is the big lake which does not freeze over, so winds coming out of the north are moderated. So what we're seeing here is a decrease in the occurrence of damaging temperatures. So the winters are actually getting milder. Winters are getting milder, which is a good thing. But what we're finding is, and I'll show you in a moment, this past winter, we had a case where we have over 15 occasions with temperatures below minus 20 degrees, as low as minus 23. So all it takes is one winter to bring the viticulture to its knee. So even though our winters are getting milder, what's happening here, and you have to understand the way in which the vines go through dormancy. When vines go through a dormancy, when they sit there with all the leaves falling off, they may have about 1,000 hours of dormancy, and once that period is completed, the vines are ready to bud. So any warming trend would actually stimulate bud bursts, and if that warming persists, you have some growth, and then you have a cold snap. It doesn't have to be minus 20. It just have to be minus 1, minus 2 degrees, and then you have a major problem in your hand. So what we are finding in the Niagara region and throughout Canada is that even though our winters are getting milder, which allows us to expand food production in areas considered once marginal, the volatility, in other words, what we're finding is that warm spells followed by cold snaps are becoming a major issue. And this is what the climatologists are trying to address in terms of climate change, is the term volatility. Those of you who are, of course, are all economists, so you know about investments, right? The stock market goes up and down, but it might be an increase in trend. And so the trend might be an increasing one, but you're concerned with the day-to-day volatility. And that's becoming a major issue, not only for viticulture in Canada, but in fact, it is a problem that we're finding throughout. Now, we're facing a problem in terms of temperature. Precipitation is not a real issue in Canada. Temperature is the number one concern. In California, precipitation is the one concern. They've had a drought for the last 3 years, and the situation is getting worse. Australia's been fighting this for many years. And of course, in Mendoza, it goes without saying, right? If you look on top of the mountains, snowfall is becoming less and less each year. And that is becoming a serious issue for viticulture because the bulk of your water, if not all of it, comes from runoff from the mountains. That is becoming a big issue. So one of the things that viticulturists and vineyard owners have to address is really the problem of volatility, and a problem especially in parts of southern Spain, Italy, Greece, southern France, much of California, much of Australia, Chile, Mendoza is becoming a very, very serious issue. So climate change, it does have, for some of the countries such as Canada, is opening up opportunities, but those opportunities do have also some degree of risk. I wish I could go on because there's lots more to show here in terms of the Great Lakes. This is one more minute?
So you're pretty much done.
Okay, I'm done. But this is the area where we are seeing expansion in viticulture for us in Ontario. These are potential areas in which we can expand. This is the major area. As you can see, these 2 lakes here, the moderation of these 2 lakes. This here is becoming more and more ice-free. One of the things that we're seeing with climate change is the sensitivity. Well, we know that the Arctic is, the sea ice over the Arctic is declining at a very, very rapid rate. That has also a big impact on the entire weather system for North America, so-called polar vortex, the weakening of the jet stream, which is now becoming more what we call north-south flow as opposed to an east-west flow, all of which then has an implication not only for viticulture in North America, but also for Europe, because Europe also is likely to see some worsening of climatic conditions. So I'll stop there and I'll take some questions, but there's lots more stuff there. We're told we only have 50 minutes.
All right, thank you, Tony.
You're welcome.